don't know me, which probably is only a small handful of people, I'm Margaret Ptacek. I was not the first, but among one of the first PhD students in Carl's lab. And so I said long ago, when Carl retired, which I never really thought would happen, that we would have a symposium to honor his career and his many contributions that he's made to the field of animal communication. So I contacted my partner in crime from the days when I was here at Missouri, Felix Brayton, and he and I organized this symposium. So it's a great honor for me today to be able to introduce the symposium and tell you a bit about Carl's life and Carl's contributions to animal behavior, and particularly the field of animal communication. So I hate to have to admit this, but it was nearly 30 years ago, probably to this date, that I, as a young student finishing my master's degree where I studied well, it wasn't, now it's Pseudacris crucifer, I was living in Jefferson City, Missouri at the time, and I kept citing this guy, Gerhardt. So finally I looked at one of the papers, I said, oh yeah, he's up there in Columbia. So this is not how I recommend that anybody looking for a PhD program actually go about it. But I got in my car and I drove up here to beautiful Tucker Hall, and I knocked on the door of Carl's office, and he peeked out, kind of an irritated look on his face. And I said, if you give me 10 minutes, I'll buy you a cup of coffee and tell you why you should take me as your PhD student. And 30 minutes later, he paid for the coffee. And I was gone. And that probably turned out to be one of the best decisions, probably that either Carl or I have ever made. So, let's walk through Carl's career a little bit. Carl, of course, is the quintessential herpetology guy. He was a snake guy. I got the privilege of going with Carl to his parents' house in Savannah, him taking me out to catch scary rattlesnakes like this one, and seeing where he worked at the museum as early as probably grade school in catching snakes and studying herpetology. So he's been a herper for his whole life, and you can see he's still, you know, the herpetologist version of Crocodile Dundee there. So he got his undergraduate degree at the University of Georgia, and then traveled to the University of Texas, where he had the honor to do both a master's and a PhD with Frank Blair, who, so I'm so proud of the fact that my academic grandfather is Frank Blair. But of course, he's one of the leaders in the field of character displacement in neurons. And so here are a couple of papers that Carl published in his career looking at character displacement both in male signals and in female preferences for male signals. And he did his master's degree and his PhD in just a little over 4 years. From there, the boy prodigy traveled to Bob Kopranic's lab for a year, where he learned some electronic tricks. You can see all that electronics back there. That's what our lab used to look like 30 years ago. And published some papers with Bob, got some feel for neurophysiology. And then, of course, he joined the faculty here in the Division of Biological Sciences in 1971, and I believe his official retirement maybe was last summer. So he's been here for over 40 years, studying frogs. So Carl is an avid field biologist. He loves to get out there and slug around in the mud looking for frogs, recording frogs. Here he is recording some cicadas, I think. He's been all over the world recording frogs. These pictures are from the Amazon, but he's worked on frogs in Australia as well as frogs in the southwestern United States. And Carl once told me that he would never make one of his graduate students do anything that he wouldn't do. So he was right out there in the field with us when the alligators were swimming close, yelling while you were holding the $3,000 microphone, "Don't drop that microphone!" But he was right out there with us in the field. And of course, behind every successful man is an astonished woman. And Dana Glanz was probably the best choice that Carl ever made in his entire life. She's a beautiful, wonderful woman and has kept him sane and probably held the hand of every one of his graduate students, fed us, comforted us, told us, "Carl won't be mad at you next week." So she's the best. Carl has given numerous invited presentations all over the world. My favorite one, of course, was the one he gave at the Evolutionary and Ecology Seminar series we used to have here at Mizzou for Halloween, where we would always dress up, including the speaker. So here he is, Herr Professor Dr. Frog, where he gave the entire seminar in his German accent, which is pretty good from a boy that was raised in Savannah. He's trained numerous students in the fine arts of measuring female mating preferences in anechoic chambers just about anywhere he could set one up. He's won numerous awards throughout his career, including he's an elected fellow of the AAAS, the Animal Behavior Society. He won the Quest Award here at the Animal Behavior Society and distinguished herpetologist for the Society for the Study of Ichthyology and Herpetology. Here's a picture of Carl from a symposium that was organized by Josh, and I think Mike was involved in honoring Carl and others as famous neuron communication biologists. And notice the convergent phenotype. So this is probably why I had to switch to piscellid fishes in my career, because there was no way I was going to achieve that phenotype. But most importantly, Carl has touched the lives of many of his students. He's trained many students and postdocs, and he's taught us how to be excellent scientists. So Carl always gave us two very important pieces of advice. The first one was, always study an organism that you have a fighting chance of being smarter than. So this was frogs, now I do piscellid fishes. But the second piece of advice he gave us, and probably more importantly, is that when you ask and test questions about animal communication systems, you need to make sure you answer all four of Tinbergen's questions. So both the ultimate and the proximate mechanisms that shape the communication system. So while Carl's published over 150 papers, and I'm not going through all of them, I'll highlight a few just to show you how in his own research he showed us, both his students and us in the field, how we can ask and answer both those proximate and ultimate questions. So Carl was a leader in developing synthetic calls to use in testing paratimes for different neuron species. And he had 2 papers in Science and a paper in Nature, all in the span of about a year, using synthetic calls to ask and answer questions about female mating preferences, the propagation of those calls, and how the call properties had been shaped by the evolutionary forces in different environments and different species. He also has done neuroethology studies. Here's one with Josh. Bettina DeCamp was a graduate student when I was here who also did some neuroethology of both spring peepers and gray tree frogs, asking about the tuning of the female auditory system and which properties of male mating signals best stimulate the auditory system and how that has shaped the evolution of mating signals. He's looked at the influence of polyploidy and how changes in chromosome number affect cell size and what the consequences of that is on the advertisement call properties of gray tree frogs. So these are all proximate mechanisms that shape mating signals. But he's also, one of the most important things he taught me and all of his students is to think about the ultimate explanations as well. Which evolutionary processes and how did those evolutionary processes like sexual selection and natural selection shape the signal properties and divergence of signals between species or even between populations within a species. So for example, Alison Welch's great work on testing the good genes hypothesis for the evolution of female mating preferences in gray tree frogs, where she and Ray and Carl showed that offspring of long-calling males have higher fitness in several life history traits than short-calling males. And of course, he was a leader in the field of phylogeography. Some woman named Ptacek started it all out. I hope we're not going to hear later today that this is all wrong. But we looked at, you notice in the distribution of Hyla versicolor, these disjunct groups of populations. And so we used one of the earliest molecular phylogenies to test some hypotheses about the origins of the tetraploid. So, what's Carl going to do now that he's no longer, he's an emeritus professor? Well, I'm pretty sure he's going to do the same thing he's done for the last 40 years. He's going to travel all over the world. He's going to record frogs. He's going to do cinematography. And he's going to touch the lives of all the people whom he meets along the way in training them to be better scientists, to really listen to the communication signals of animals from a multifaceted approach, and certainly he has left an indelible mark on the field of animal communication. So with that, thank you.